Welcome to the Monster in My Head show, a podcast where we talk to real people about the real issues and insecurities a lot of us face and the things that we're doing to overcome them. I'm Bree, and today is going to be a really special episode. I'm not talking to a guest today, and the reason is because we're talking about a very special topic that's close to my heart, and I just wanted to have a conversation with you. And we're going to get into that. I do want to say, though, that on Friday of this week, I am releasing the song that inspired this whole podcast, inspired this kind of whole world building that I'm doing here, called The Monster in My Head. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. If you want to pre-save it, it's in the description. Please do. Would love for you to hear it. But today's episode is going to be talking about the inspiration behind that song. So The Monster in My Head is all about dealing with that voice in your mind that is telling you all the ways that you are a screw up, all the ways that you're a failure, all the things that you're not doing right. And a lot of times that voice can be incredibly loud, and it's really scary hearing that all the time. It feels like you can't escape because you can't escape your own mind. This is something that I have dealt with for many, many years of my life, and thankfully am now kind of coming to the other side because I've learned some ways that I can kind of combat that voice, which is something that I want to share with you today. Obviously, I'm not a therapist. This show can't take the place of therapy, but my goal here is to share with you some of the things that I've learned on how to kind of shut that voice up, because we don't deserve to live like that. So get your notebook and pen. Some wisdom is coming your way. Let me get my notes. So the first tip deals with self-talk, and the tip is to look at yourself as the child you used to be. Now, it's kind of a big concept, but I'll kind of explain what I mean. So I know for me, something that I really struggled with for a really long time was that monster in my head just beat the shit out of me on a regular basis. For me, and we kind of all have our different demons, right? Our different things that monster talks to us about. For me, it was how much of a failure I was. That was kind of the main thing that monster liked to talk to me about. It's like, you are such a failure. Nothing you've done has worked. And it was something that would beat me up so much, and I believed it, so I let it happen. And then I'll never forget, one day I was preparing for the music videos, actually, for this album. I did a music video for every song, and I had this vision of dancing in these music videos. I'm not a dancer, by the way, but I was like, this would be super cool. So for 2 weeks, I every day trained in contemporary dance on like an online platform. And there was one day specifically where I was trying to learn this contemporary dance, and I couldn't get it. I could not get it. I was like, this choreography is not working for me, bro. I just couldn't remember the moves, and I was so mad. And that voice popped up, and it was like, God damn it, why can't you get this right? It's almost like everything that you do in your life, you can't get it right. You're here trying, you look like an idiot. And I remember, this was happening, and then for some reason I looked over and I caught my reflection in the mirror, and the look of defeat and sadness on my own face shocked me, because it was such a almost childlike look of just this deep sadness. And in that moment, when I saw my face in that mirror, I just had this image of the little girl that I used to be, maybe 6 or 7. And I thought about myself saying those things to her. I thought about myself looking at this little girl and being like, you are such a failure. Everything you do, none of it works. You're just a piece of shit, And the thought of saying that to her and seeing her face and seeing her reaction was so shocking that I was like, okay, that can never happen again. And so from that point forward, anytime that voice in my mind would come up, even if at that moment I felt like what it was saying was true, I started thinking to myself, would I say this to her? Would I get down on my knees and look at that little girl in the eye and tell her the things that I'm telling myself right now? And the answer was always no. And so what I've kind of learned is that if that answer is no, that you wouldn't say that to your younger self, then that voice is not telling you the truth. It's trying to shame you. It's trying to make you feel like shit. And, where does that come from? Who knows? Probably a lot of different areas. Probably trauma, probably, the way you grew up, whatever. Doesn't really matter. But if you don't see that as truth about that younger version of you, then that's not true. And that's not how you should be talking to yourself. So my first tip is whenever that voice comes up and is telling you that you're a piece of shit, is to think about, would I say this to the younger version of myself? And if the answer is no, then that voice is lying to you. And you can confidently say, you know what? I'm not going to listen to that. I don't need to listen to that. The second tip for dealing with the monster in your head is changing your definition of success. So success is something that I talk a lot about in this podcast because it's something that has was probably the hardest thing for me to deal with. The way that I grew up with a lot of pressure on my shoulders to be extraordinary, to achieve a lot of things. And a lot of those things I didn't achieve. A lot of them I did, but a lot of them I didn't. And so what kind of happened over the years was that I wasn't able to see the things that I had succeeded in, that I did do well, because I was always looking at these things that I didn't accomplish. And I was like, I am a failure. Again, that whole failure thing comes up a lot for me. But then, I started thinking about that a little bit more. And I was like, okay, I can't live like this anymore. So something's got to change, because I can't keep thinking about how I'm not doing anything right. I haven't achieved all my goals, etc. So I was like, I'm defining success in a way that is so dependent on things outside of me. So for example, for me, I was like, by the time I'm 17, I need to have played this, capacity of a theater, or I need to have started a business, or I need to whatever. And the thing is, a lot of that can come from hard work, but a lot of that shit is out of your control, at least for me. A lot of it's out of my control. And so my definition of how I saw myself was dependent on a lot of things that I could not control. So in reality, I was setting myself up for failure. So I kind of thought to myself, all right, what would it look like then to redefine success? How can I define it in a way that I can control it? So an example of that is actually with this project. When I was preparing to release this album, when I was thinking about doing this podcast, the first thing that came to my head was, oh my God, well, no one's going to hear it. No one's going to care. How am I going to get the millions of listens that I want to get? And it caused me so much anxiety that I was thinking about not releasing it. And then I thought to myself, wait a minute, what about if I realize that releasing this is really hard for me and this is really scary, but if I do it, I succeeded. And that kind of made me realize, like, oh, wait, I can change the way that I see success as something that I can control. So now for me, at least, simply doing the thing that is hard and that is scary and that is required for me to grow as a person, that means that I'm successful. And then whatever happens after that, if a bunch of people hear my music, if people hear the podcast, if people read the book that I'm writing, it's just a cherry on top. But again, because those are things that I cannot control, my definition of success is not reliant on those things, if that makes sense. So that's a big one, I would say, that if you find yourself thinking about how you're not in the place in your life that you want to be, and you're defining success in a way that's really dependent on things outside of you, what would it look like to change that and start thinking, who is the person that I want to become? What are the things that I can do internally? What are the ways that I can challenge myself to become a better version of myself and see that as success? Because it is. It is. And what's so interesting about that is that what I've realized is that external success, I think, will come a lot easier when you are happy with yourself and when you feel successful inside, because then you're not desperately searching for external validation. You're not being like, well, somebody care. You're happy with who you are. And then, things will come to you when they're supposed to come to you. The next tip is to detach yourself from a timeline. So something, at least for me, that monster would tell me a lot is you haven't done the things you were supposed to do by now. I think for a lot of people, that looks like getting married. That looks like having the career of your dreams. That looks like maybe buying a house. All of those things are great. But the thing is, when you attach a timeline to them, that's when they can morph into that monster. And what's interesting about that, our society is so much like, you need to have these things by this time. But then if you actually look at the statistics, it paints a different picture. So I saw this statistic recently. Vicki Larson, a journalist and co-author of The New I Do, Reshaping Marriage for Skeptics, Realists, and Rebels, cites that 6 of every 10 couples are unhappy and 4 out of 10 have considered leaving their partner. A statistic by CNBC states that 50% of people are unhappy with their jobs. So we look at social media and all we see are these people who have all this stuff that we feel like we should have at this point in our lives. And we see the perfect job. We see the person who has their partner and they look so happy. And maybe they are, and that's super awesome. But the thing is that a lot of that, you don't see the full picture, you know? So for us to like say, I have to do these things by this time because everyone else is doing them, a lot of those people who are doing them are not happy. We are all super unique. All of our stories are super different. There are some people that become multimillionaires at 20 years old and then lose everything and then rebuild their lives. There are some people who don't do anything with their lives, anything, because like, what does that even mean? Until they're 65 years old. You know, all of us have our different timelines of when we do different things in our life. And that does not dictate how successful or not successful we are in our lives. We're different. Our timelines are different. You don't need to do a certain thing by a certain time as long as you're taking care of yourself, being a good person, and continually moving forward and growing. Dude, that's all you can ask of yourself, you know? So when that monster in your head is telling you you should have done this at this time, just remember that a lot of the people that you're comparing yourself to, a lot of those people are not experiencing the happiness that they are portraying online. It just is what it is. My fourth tip is recognizing that hustle culture is bullshit. So for me, that monster in my head, when it was at its worst, would constantly push me until I broke. It's like, you're not working hard enough. You're resting. How dare you? How dare you rest? And I was getting to a point where I was in the cycle of, I would work super hard. I would set insane goals for myself. And then it would get to a point where I literally just couldn't do it anymore. And I would stop. And then I would have to start over. I would keep burning out. I would keep burning out. And what I realized is that that thing that I was trying to go for, you know, whatever that is, whether that's, you know, for me, it was always like starting businesses, being a famous musician, blah, all that different stuff. That shit is not worth my serenity now. That does not mean that you don't work hard. Does not mean you don't have goals. But this whole idea of working and just killing yourself to get to this thing is so overrated, and it is pushed so much in our culture, and it's really fucking dangerous. And I can say that because I was in that for a very long time. I feel like you could probably look back at my social media and see me being like, and now, like, Jesus, I feel like I've needed to take a chill pill so many times in my life. Because what that is preaching is that if you work hard, if you just sacrifice everything in your life now, you are going to have the thing that you want, and then you can be happy. That's a lie, unfortunately, because what's going to happen, and we've seen this a lot. I mean, a lot of people who have success, who have fame, who have money have come out and said this, that when you get to that point, let's say you want to make $1 million, super cool goal. Love that for you. You kill yourself to get there. You make $1 million. You start hanging around with people who make $5 million. And then you're like, oh, I gotta make $5 million. So then you work your way until you make $5 million, and it will never stop. It'll never stop. So if you're putting your worth as a person and not living your life in a way that makes you happy, because you're sacrificing your happiness to get to a certain goal, you're not taking care of yourself in that process, just know that when you reach that goal, you're going to be happy for a little bit. And then it's going to be something else. That target is always going to move. Take it from someone who has done this so many times. I'd have these goals. I'd reach them. I'd build something. I'd do something. And then I'd be like, oh, well, that's obviously not enough. I got to work harder. And then I would burn out, and it wasn't sustainable. So, you know, and I don't have the answers to this necessarily. I'm still figuring it out myself. But I think for me, what I'm trying to learn is, how do I work from a place of abundance, excitement about what I'm doing, but also recognize that taking care of myself is the most important thing. And whether I reach those goals or not, that is not a reflection of who I am, my value as a person. And give myself grace and give myself rest, and not drive myself so hard. Something that my therapist told me, and I think I mentioned this in an episode. She was like, you're treating yourself like like a slave master in a way. Like you're a slave master, and then you are just trying to just force yourself to do whatever you have to in order to reach a certain goal. And you're doing that in like shame and in guilt and in all this different stuff. And it's like, you can't live like that if you want to be happy. So I think for me right now, and I'm interested if anybody has any insight into this, please leave it in the comments. I'm learning what it looks like to have balance in my life, of recognizing that this thing that has been sold to us is dangerous. It's bullshit. It doesn't take into account the fact that, happiness is not bought by a bunch of money. It's not bought by that perfect job. That's internal. So what does it look like to take care of yourself along with pursuing your goals in a healthy way? So that's number 4. And my fifth and final tip, so much wisdom, is that I have started seeing my life as an adventure and not a journey. So for me, that monster in my head would always say, when you reach this point in your life, that's when you're going to be happy, kind of like with the whole hustle culture thing. And that's when your life can start. And then I realized, wait, that's not real. Life is always changing. Life is always evolving. And the idea that there is a certain destination that you're going to reach, and then you're just going to be happy and everything's going to be great, that's not real. Like, even when you reach your goals, even when you get to that point, life is going to continue to change and things are going to continue to evolve. And, you might do it for a little bit and then realize, hey, I actually don't like this job anymore. Or actually, I'm not really happy in this relationship that I've been wanting for so long. And things are just going to keep changing. So this idea that we're seeing our lives as this journey, I think it's really robbing us from having joy in the process of just living our lives, because we're always like, well, I just have to suffer until I get here. So I think for me, what I've started to do is started to see my life as an adventure. I'm like, all right, every single day, I'm just kind of exploring what today is going to look like. Again, have my goals, have the things that I'm working towards, but really trying to hold those with loose hands, if that makes sense. Just being like, it might turn out the way that I think it will or want it to, or it might not. But like, that's okay. I think it's scary because this whole unknown thing, I know for me at least, like I've been such a control freak in my life all the time. It's like I've always wanted to control the outcome, but every time I've tried to control the outcome, seeing my life as this journey that has this destination, trying to control the steps to get there, it has 1000% never worked. It's never worked. Ever. But when I started to learn that I don't have control, the only thing I have control over is myself, is the way that I see myself, the way that I treat myself, how much I grow, how much I change, etc. That's the only thing I have control over. And that's okay. I think the thing to remember, at least the thing that I'm reminding myself, is that we create our reality. Now, I'm not saying that's not a manifesting thing. I'm not saying wish your way out of poverty, wish your way out of a really difficult situation. That doesn't exist. But what I am saying is that the way that we look at our lives dictates how we experience them, if that makes sense. So for me, the thing that I've been working on is changing my perspective on my life so that it's not so much about the things that I want, all the things that I don't have, but looking at the things that I do have, the things that I'm really grateful for, and being super stoked about my life and the fact that I'm honestly alive. Excited about the future, but also really trying not to just base my happiness on what could happen, but wonder and work towards what would it be like to be happy now. So my goal for myself, as kind of going back to that whole success thing, is my definition of success has become, how can I be the healthiest, best version of myself every day and continue to move towards that in my growth? So what does that look like emotionally? What does that look like mentally, spiritually, physically? How can I use every single day to become just healthier, to work through my shit, to let go of stuff that I don't need to be holding on to work out and to feel good about my body, whatever that looks like for you. And focusing on that, I have found personally that life has just been a lot better. Has not been perfect. Actually, a lot of shit has actually happened recently, where kind of my whole life was kind of like turned upside down a little bit in this process. But I've been able to handle it a lot better because I've had a level of peace that I've never really experienced before, and it's by using these things that I'm talking about. So anyway, that's my long tangent. I hope any of that helps. I mean, we'll see. Take it as you will. Take it with a grain of salt. Um, but I just also want to encourage you that if you're really struggling right now, that you're not alone. There's so many people, man. We're all working through it. We're all doing the best we can, And if you're feeling like life is really hard and you just don't know how to keep going, you don't know what to do, I just want you to know that like it does get better. There are ways for it to get better. This is not forever. Man, I know for me that there's been so many times where the emotions were so strong that I didn't even know what to do with them. I was like, oh my God, if I'm going to feel like this forever, then I should just bow out now. Thankfully I didn't do that, but I just want you to know that things do get better, especially as you get older. Perspectives change. You learn a lot of new things, and it's not going to stay like this forever. So anyway, those are my 5 tips. I hope that's helpful. If you want to hear the song that this whole podcast was based on, that talks a little bit about all this, the pre-save link is in the description, or if you're hearing this when it's already out, the link is in the description, or you can look up Monster in My Head. I'm sure it'll hopefully come up. I have a music video for it. I've done a lot of cool things for it. I'm really excited about that song. It's a song that means a lot to me, so I hope you really enjoy it. And tune in next week. We're going to have an episode that is all about the behind the scenes of that song, how it was made, the specific story behind that song, which is kind of wild. It has to do with having dreams about the said monster in my head and learning how to fight them off. It was horrible. But thank you for joining me. I'm excited to see you next week. Subscribe, like it if you want. Yeah. And see you later. Peace.